Welcome back. In this video, let me address an issue that I have left pending. That is the difference of conventional and unconventional wars. Before addressing the latest developments in the case of Palestine. Conventional wars are wars like the Second World War or the Ukraine War, where two powers have a dispute about a piece of territory, normally borders, and unconventional wars are basically about insurgencies, two powers disputing the same territory, as for instance, the conflict in Palestine. So let's address this issue in this introduction in four parts. Number eight, letter eight. These are political wars where the dispute is inside one country, two powers disputing power inside one country, and you can make parallels. In the case of religion, for instance, David Koresh and the Davidians, there is a struggle for power. The best portrayal of this idea is the interview in 1969 to General Yap. General Yap was the Vietnamese general who kicked the French in 1953. In 1953, in Dien Bien Phu, and the Americans in Saigon in 1975. So it's a very telling interview. If you have a chance, click the link and read it. B. Unconventional wars are normally waged in the long term. Take into account, for instance, Algeria. The Battle of Algiers took place in a couple of years, was with an efficient work of intelligence. The French dismantled the FLN in the Kasbah, but 5 years later, the FLN expels the French from Algeria. What the FLN what Algeria, not the FLN, what Algeria would have been willing to accept autonomy in 1954, when the conflict started, was not longer acceptable in 1962, when they demanded nothing but total independence, and that's what they got. Similarly, in the case of the Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya, it was suffocated. It didn't take long for the British to suffocate it when it started in 1926. But the rebellion stayed latent and kept controlling the population, because that's basically because it's a political war. They try to control the population, and they did so until 1952, when Kenya got its independence. Or take into account, for instance, the Chinese Revolution, with Mao, that started in 1927 and lasted until 1949. Or if you want a more closer case, the American independence that started in 1765 and only ended in 1783. They are waged in the long term, and that's something mentioned by General Yap, just in case. Finally, consider the case of the Philippines. If it started in 1899 and was suffocated in 1902, yet because what Arthur MacArthur, our representative in the Philippines, left was a feudal system, similar to the feudal system in Central America in the 1980s, It wasn't until the 50s with Ramon Magsaysay, president who was sponsored by OSSS Colonel Edward Lansdale, that you get some stability and some peace in that country. See, they start as terrorist movements and only evolve to guerrillas when they reach a critical mass, like in the case of Cuba, for instance. But if the guerrillas are overwhelmed by the status quo forces, they can easily develop into terrorist cells and they camouflage into the population. That's part of the of the way they work. They don't wear uniforms. They don't make like last stunts. No, they just camouflage, go back to their cellular organization as guerrillas and camouflage and wait. Then the they because they are political wars, they rely on public opinion, not on specific military wins. Take, for instance, the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive was considered a success by the American generals, but it was also considered a success by General Yap, and he was right because it proved a political point, and these are political wars. The American militaristic point of view proved to be too short-sighted. Or take into account the case of Algiers after the battle of Algeria after the Battle of Algiers. Take into account that both the Vietnam and the Algeria Liberation War were basically won in the field of public opinion in both the United States and France. And having said that, let's mention mention some considerations about the political nature of these wars with two well-known cases. Iraq. Just before the Iraq war, we kept promoting Ahmed Chalabi, an Iraqi lobbyist who just wanted the Saddam Hussein in the front. And when after the war, it happened that Ahmed Chalabi had no political following. He had no political base. So we Americans tried to fill that gap, and we sent Paul Bremer. And Ali al-Sistani, a Shia cleric from Iraq, tried to find a peaceful accommodation between Sunnis and Shias. But his arrogance during his 13 months of mediocre administration that has been portrayed very thoroughly by Rahib Chandrasekaran in Imperial Life in the Emerald City, show how Paul Bremer's stupidity allowed the Ba'athist Sunni army turn into a guerrilla movement that caused lots of blood and suffering for both Americans and especially for Iraqis. This was, of course, used by Al Qaeda, which bombed the Mosque of Samarra, and after the Mosque of Samarra incident, there is a civil war between Shias and Sunnis. And don't come to me saying, oh, they have all Shias and Sunnis, they have all been fighting each other for. No, there was an ethnic cleansing, but there was an ethnic cleansing because they were integrated in the first place. Otherwise, what they could have cleansed. So it does in other words, because they are political wars, there are other actors that can take that can take advantage of of our stupid decisions, which in this case were incarnated in Paul Bremer. And then another actor jumped to the fight that it was Al Sadar, who was the Shia cleric, who was more belligerent, and then we found ourselves fighting not only the Sunnis but also the Shias. That this is masterfully portrayed in David Korn's Hubris. You can see the link. You will find the link in the video description. And the only real progress made during all this time was thanks in part, thanks to David Petraeus when he proposed the Sunni search, at least the part that involved involving the Sunni getting a political accommodation with the Sunnis. Then we have another case, Afghanistan. For those who in their ignorance say that well, this Afghanistan, these people are used to backward ways and whatever. No, you can see photographs from the 1970s where there are photographs from the 1970s where you can see Afghan women wearing miniskirts. Was a different country. The times from when the monarchy yielded to a new republic, and the transition didn't affect their ways of life until they got caught in the Cold War. Once they got caught in the Cold War, we supported the Mujahideens, as you must remember, when the Soviets intervened in the young republic that was very unstable, yes, but at least the life of the Afghan people didn't suffer traumatic changes they were going to suffer after we led the Mujahideen wing and just abandoned the country. If you destabilize the country because you want to hurt the Soviets or because whatever you want to hurt, whoever you want to hurt, at least take responsibility for the people you are leaving behind. So that was the starting point when Afghanistan turns into a quagmire where the local warlords, basically those of the Pashtun origin, dominated the other warlords, but they were in constant war until that quagmire was replaced by other quagmire when the Taliban, sponsored by Pakistan, took the country. Then it happened 9/11, and we invaded Afghanistan. The problem is that is because we had a deck of cards and we had to fill with the deck of cards, we had to deplete all the old guard of the Taliban. And after the death of their leader, Mullah Omar, they were replaced by a new, more radical wave of Taliban, which are the ones who are in charge right now, and who are much more emboldened because of Biden's clumsy withdrawal. The consequence is that the life for women today doesn't resemble at all the life for women in the 1970s. And the country is such a quagmire because not even now they live in peace because you have ISIS, K fighting the Taliban. Not even the Chinese want to exploit the lithium resources Afghanistan has in abundance. Finally, insurgencies are not necessarily violent if you consider, for instance, the case of Gandhi and India. What characterizes insurgencies is their political goals. Having said that, let's see what scenarios we have in the case of insurgencies. This before we address the specific case of Palestine. First case is the insurgency has no political support from the population. This is the case of the Baader-Meinhof in Germany. You must remember the Munich massacre perpetrated by this communist faction. The case of the Shining Path in Peru after 1985, when the Shining Path tried to force the Peruvian peasants into the Maoist ways of life, because they resisted, they started killing it, and they alienated completely the peasantry. Or the Malayan emergency in the 1950s, where the British had one advantage, that they could contain the problem in the areas populated by Chinese immigrants. This helped them a lot to separate the insurgents from the rest of the population without alienating the population. Second case is the insurgencies have political support from the population. In this case, many times they succeed. This is the case of Vietnam, Algeria, and the American Revolution, as we have seen. And in this case, unless you provide a political solution, like accommodation in time, remember the case of the French, normally you lose. But there is also much more recently a third option, that is the case of the insurgency has political support, but from the population, but you destroy the country. You either turn it into a failed state, for instance, the Second Chechen War, where Putin pretty much destroyed the Chechnya and installed Karimov, that is a very peculiar, to not say extravagant puppet, or the Central Americas of the 1980s, where after years of dirty war, you left just failed states where the power was divided between local oligarchies and former insurgents who had turned into bandits in the rural areas. Is this, or you remove the population, like the Romans after the Jewish revolt of the year 70? And as I will propose, maybe the case of Palestine, from what we know from recent developments. So, first, let's address the case. In the case of Palestine, what Biden could have done, because this is fundamental to understand what the possibilities for Palestine are now that Trump is president. Biden had the precedent of 2014, when Kerry was duped by Netanyahu, and yet he made the same mistakes. A, Biden needed a sound narrative to avoid repeat the mistake made by Kerry in 2014, that is trusting Netanyahu. And this sound narrative was provided by the Olmer plant. The Olmer plant was a plant for a multinational force that would occupy Palestine or at least Gaza, while the Palestinian Authority or an alternative to Hamas was overhauled, was created, or the Palestinian Authority was overhauled, because you could not leave a power vacuum, and you could not leave Netanyahu in control either, because it was his policy of playing Hamas against Fatah and Fatah against Hamas, which had led to the outcome, terrible outcome of October 7th. Instead, Biden opted for trusting Netanyahu, which is unforgivable. Consider that Olmer plans, it was Olmer and Rabin. Olmer's offer was similar to Rabin's. Both were prime ministers and were the best deals Palestine have been offered so far. They were rejected by Arafat because they were not 100% a return to pre-1967 borders, which was very short-sighted. But that will give you an idea that this could have been a political solution that could have been stable, because you win nothing having a political solution if it's not going to be stable, if it's not going to be acceptable by the population, whose favor you want to gain, so they don't pay attention, so they don't follow, so they don't accept the insurgency. Let's see what Biden could have done. He could have before the idea, before just after October 7, before the IDF mobilized inside Gaza, he could have, and again this is Dolmer plan, organize an international force with at least Egypt and Jordan. Probably Saudi Arabia was not going to participate, but at least Egypt and Jordan would have been willing to participate, to fill the void before Netanyahu could fill it. Yet this would have allowed Biden to do exactly what we have said, fill the void before Netanyahu could, and create a feasible, an acceptable Palestinian Authority. Let's remember that the Palestinian Authority lost all respect from the Palestinian people and lost the election of 2006 because number one, it was extremely corrupt, and number two, they were pretty much the henchmen of the Likud party, and that was used by Hamas to win the 2006 elections before Hamas took Gaza by force. Number two, if let's say Biden, for some reason or another, missed the opportunity of acting before Netanyahu did, then he could have used the protests linked to the hostages and the narrative based on Olmer's plan to back Gallant, because Gallant might be a butcher, but Gallant at least had more idea of what counterinsurgency was. So he wanted just to degrade the guerrilla capabilities of Hamas. The problem is that by doing so, he also alienated the population And you must remember that now Hamas pretty much has replenished its ranks with all the people who, after more than 47,000 dead and the destruction of their cities, just want revenge. But at least there was more honesty. Gallant represented the honest part of Likud. To what so using this, what could Biden have done? He just had to use Gallant's leverage to flip 5 to 8 seats, depending on how you count it, on how you count them in the Knesset, and get early elections. That would have provided you a more reliable partner for your ceasefire, either Gallant or Gantz, who was the leader of the opposition. Remember that at some point, Gallant, Gantz, and Lapid backed Olmer's plan. But as soon as Netanyahu kept rising with Biden's help in the polls, they backpedal on their support. That's another unforgivable miss from the Biden administration. And now that you were aware that you have missed those two opportunities, you could not miss a third one. Then, even if it was a more dramatic option, that was using the arms as leverage, the military aid we provide Israel as leverage. But Biden was always too weak to even consider that possibility. As a consequence of that, pretty much Biden turned Netanyahu into a new Julius Caesar, who used that leverage to transform the Middle East and expand the war to Syria, Lebanon, and a bit of Yemen in his all quasi-war with the Houthis. So before we finish, we have to have an idea what are the most likely results, what is the most likely outcome of this tragedy under Trump. And that's a bit difficult to say at this time because a few days ago, Trump was calling for a permanent Palestinian resettlement. Then his press secretary said that resettlement was going to be temporary, only before Trump doubled down saying that it was going to be permanent. So consider that we don't have complete, very reliable information at this point, and I doubt we are going to have very reliable information until all the facts are consummated. Let's make an assessment of the situation, and I have divided that assessment in 4 points. Biden's ceasefire is a false ceasefire, it's a mirage, and that will help Netanyahu lower the visibility of the conflict in Palestine now that supposedly we have peace. That will allow him to reward his partners, Netanyahu's partners, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, especially Smotrich, with resettlements and constant harassment of the Palestinian population that are going to end up, as a result of the attrition, displacing them or detonating a third intifada, which will be used as an excuse to remove them anyway. B, as these settlements are going to take place in the West Bank and most probably also in Gaza. If Trump's plan came to fruition, they would have economic interest, probably Trump's, in the coast. There would be, and the rest of the areas would be occupied by Jewish settlers. And if some Gazans were allowed in the less inhabitable areas of Gaza, they would be left to live in hamlets in those areas or removed as soon as they protested. See, unfortunately, at this point, Netanyahu has no other option but an ethnic cleansing. But because if imagine yourself in their shoes. Your land has been destroyed, and where you are allowed to come back, you find that your land is somebody else's land now. What are you going to do? So you could expect an increase in terrorism if Gazans were allowed to return. This terrorism will keep Netanyahu's Likud faction electable, and that will help him added to the effect, the Julius Caesar effect that he has gotten thanks to Biden. He would have allowed him to tame the judiciary, the attorney general, and the Shin Bet, which are the only institutions in Israel still containing the far-right hubris. This because just after Netanyahu fired Gallant, he has already tamed the IDF. Now, more recently, Netanyahu says that only those Gazans who renounce terror will be allowed to return, but this is laughable. Insurgencies don't have armies or air forces, so they rely a lot on deceit, on camouflaging inside the population, on deceiving their enemies. So asking a returning Gazan to promise that he's not going to embrace terror is laughable. Because if he wants revenge, he will say that he will renounce terror, and next day he will use a bomb vest to kill as many Israelis as he can. Actually, we have seen that the incidents of terrorism have been increasing in the last days. And yet, take this into account. Right now, the Gazans are in shock. They just want the war to end. But as soon the dust settles, they will want revenge. Consider that even now that the dust has not completely settled, Hamas has already replenished its ranks. Imagine what will happen when Gazans' anguish turns into rage. Finally, groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis will use the Palestinian cause to gain leverage, and that will also encourage Sunni groups like in Sunni countries, in other countries, consider, for instance, the pressure the important Wahhabi religious sector is going to put on Saudi Arabia to do the same, to provide. It was going to be. They are going to use their leverage to force in the case of Saudi Arabia, probably to turn to the other way when they provide funds and logistical support. There are other Gulf countries that have been providing money and support to Hamas, and if there is a complete alienation, thanks to Netanyahu, of the Arab world, they will have more freedom to support these insurgencies under the table, of course. That will also increase instability in countries like Jordan and create windows of opportunity for Russia, which already has a leverage on the Houthis in Yemen and Iran. All this means increased internal pressure on Arab governments willing to side with the West. Remember that this affects not just the Middle East, the position of the United States in the Middle East. Remember that Muslim countries in ASEAN, have also start turning against the United States and in favor of China because of the United States Biden's policy to cave to Netanyahu no matter what. So what is my assessment of the situation? It is very, very dark. Netanyahu has pushed the situation to a point where his only option is ethnic cleansing. And because the alternative of peace is unacceptable, he would lose power, he would lose Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and he knows that Trump is going to be on his side. So no matter what, so this is what we have. And what can Democrats do? Democrats can grow up some guts, some courage, and repudiate Biden's policies, embrace a new narrative centered on the Olmert's plan. Are they doing that? No. So it's hard to be optimistic, right? Well, having said that, I leave you with our newscast.
Good evening. This is Brian Thomas Simons, and these are the main headlines of this hour. Among other news.
A. Senate Minority Leader protested USAID's uncertain situation after President Trump laid off most of its staff and froze its funding. "We will win. We will not rest," chanted a group of Democratic leaders in a call to the youth and a reminder to the working class that they have not forgotten their sorrows. The whole event is available in TikTok and Kick. B. 2 weeks after a mass grave associated with Biden's dog Commander was found, which may or may not be related to former President Biden's 11-year pardon for his dog just before leaving office, President Trump has also granted 11-year pardons for his sons Don Jr. and Eric, which may or may not be related to the time between 2017 and 2020 they went under the nom de guerre Uday and Kwase. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt announced yesterday that an unknown number of Social Security numbers and tax returns were hacked after 19-year-old Edward Korestein, aka Big Balls, the youngest member of Elon Musk's Doge, inadvertently spent 2 hours working on the Pornhub website. "It won't happen again," stated Doge temporary organization executive Elon Musk. Instructions have been provided to the public on the Doge website on how to reset Social Security numbers. As for tax information, Musk added, "Nothing can be done. But at least we have received assurances from Treasury that they will not be audited." Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, hours after President Trump announced the permanent resettlement of Palestinians out of Gaza, confirmed that the resettlement would be temporary. When asked by AP News White House correspondent Zeke Miller if both statements were not contradictory, Secretary Leavitt responded rhetorically, "Why can't it be both?" When asked by CBS White House correspondent Weijia Zhang what would happen if Palestinians were allowed to return to Gaza after reconstruction, to their property rights in the area, and whether this could not ignite irreconcilable friction that would reignite violence in the area, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt replied, "Why can't it be both?" And when Alex Gangitano, the Hill White House correspondent, in the third question of the day, asked, in light of the aftermath of the terrorist attack in Beirut in 1983, what would happen if something similar happened to American contractors working in the reconstruction area? Secretary Leavitt responded by declaring that the press conference had regrettably exceeded the time limit before leaving the James S. Brady press room. Community service. A Fort Myers man who made false bomb threats against himself in another person's name as revenge, not knowing that using the same IP address would reveal his identity and became the symbol of an anti-homeschooling campaign, is launching his first fundraiser for his anti-homeschooling campaign on change.org and gofundme.com.
This has been the news of this hour. Sponsored by Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit. Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? Did you vote for Trump in 2016 and then in 2020? This is the right church for you. If so, Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit is the only Christian church that can promise you in the Lord to have 72 virgins in heaven for only a donation of $50 a month. You will have access to those 72 virgins in heaven. For an additional $25, you will be allowed to replace 10 of them, and for $100, Heaven Premium, you will be allowed to choose them for yourself. Guaranteed, if you're not satisfied with those 72 virgins after you die, full refund of your money. We accept Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover.